Joining us at the top of the show here for a discussion on that subject is the founder of I Squared Capital, a member of President Biden's National Infrastructure Advisory Council. Sadek Wahba is author of Build, Investing in America's Infrastructure. I got the primer right here. It's a really cool book. Sadek, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So I want to get into what you write about here, but firstly, since we're talking AI, is this an industry that is going to revitalize infrastructure, or is it too isolated, specific to data centers?
Not at all. I think it's going to be a critical part of the infrastructure revival because AI allows us to improve on the efficiency of infrastructure across all sectors, whether it's water efficiency, whether it's power generation. So you're going to get that across the board without a single doubt. At the same time, AI requires data centers. Data centers requires power, requires water, so that it will also go and unleash a lot of investments in infrastructure.
And as far as the visibility of that goes, what do you see? What's already in the ground and what's coming? I mean, some of this is like updating existing facilities, but it seems like there's a lot of shovels being put in the ground too for new projects. We've got a lot of Taiwanese companies that are going to start producing here as well. What is the highlight to you in this sector so far?
I'll give you an example. It used to, today, to build a regular data center will take a couple of acres. Now you're talking of hyper data centers, hyperscale data centers, where you're talking of hundreds of acres to build them. You're talking before about 30, 40 megawatts, which is looking to double and triple in terms of capacity over the coming years. So these are extraordinary numbers, which will require the infrastructure to support the development of that data center. I'm not even talking about the use of AI in the applications, in the infrastructure applications.
Okay. Now, when you, in your book, to kind of weave these things together, you talk about how the U.S. is still lagging, that we're in an infrastructure crisis is what you call it. Does this help us get, back on track, or do we really need like innovative ideas beyond just private tech companies that are, looking to make a buck on their specific projects?
No, you need to have innovative ideas. Look, Florida has gone through two hurricanes, Hurricane Helen and Milton. That will require a huge amount of infrastructure investments, not simply to rebuild, but to improve the infrastructure to make it more resilient. So that's an important element. The second thing is you talk about technology, so we need to upgrade our infrastructure to account for the new technologies. That's another element. So we need to find innovative solutions to be able to do that. I've discussed the creation of an infrastructure bank that has the ability to provide loans, including equity, to these projects. The creation of a 401k where people can put $5,000, $10,000 on a tax-deferred or tax-free basis, which will help raise capital to invest in infrastructure. The involvement of the private sector through public-private partnerships. All of these are mechanisms that we should be thinking about over the coming period, because we will have a huge infrastructure investment that needs to be done over the coming years.
So why the bank? What about the old-fashioned muni bond route? What's wrong with that?
The old-fashioned muni bond is still available and is an important critical source of revenue, but effectively it has to be repaid over a period of time. And cities and municipalities are facing, at the end of the day, stress on their balance sheet. If you look at the US as a whole, we have a deficit to GDP of 6.5%. We have debt to GDP of about 120%. It went from something like 60, 62% in 2008 and basically doubled in that period. So it's going to become more and more difficult to be able to finance that through the issuance of bonds, which is effectively a promise to repay in the future, which will be repaid by future generations at some point. And that puts stress on the economy and our ability to finance ourselves at attractive rates.
One thing that I've always felt is a compelling solution, and that you do talk about it a good bit, is public-private partnerships, P3s. It was something that's obviously, had several examples, but it's also something that feels like it hasn't quite taken off the way many thought it would. Here in Chicago, actually, we've got a pretty good example of one in the Skyway that you do write about that was kind of a volatile path, but seems like it ended up in the right place, expected to be worth a good bit when it comes to fruition here. How come we don't use that style more? It seems like that is the future, the public-private option that bypasses basically debt.
Absolutely. I think the introduction of public-private partnerships is going to be an essential tool in the coming years if we want to invest in infrastructure in a smart way. Let's be clear, not every infrastructure asset needs to be through a PPP. In many cases, the government does a very good job at doing it, the municipalities, the cities, and if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So let's leave it the way it is. On the other hand, in many areas, you need to invest a lot more to upgrade the system. I can think of our water systems across the US. We have 55,000 water authorities. We need to be able to consolidate and create scale. We need to be able to upgrade. We have over 2 million people who do not have any access to water. When I survey people and ask them, are you willing to have an increase in user fees? People say absolutely. Do you care if it's done by the government or by the private sector? People say as long as it's done efficiently, we really don't care. So there is a demand for an improvement in our infrastructure investment, in our water sector specifically, and that could be done in the form of a partnership between the government and the private sector.
Along those lines, Sadek, I'm wondering if there's any role, and I will preface this with the statement that anybody who watches the show knows I'm probably one of the biggest crypto cynics in media, but I do wonder if there's a use case somewhere for cryptos in this. For example, almost public-private partnership. What if you IPO'd an infrastructure project through like a crypto market, where people could directly own access to revenues from a bridge or a tollway, the people in the area? It seems like an interesting way to potentially distribute revenue. Is there any role for digital assets or ownership or revenue-backed crypto in infrastructure?
Yeah, Oliver, it's a very interesting idea. That's the kind of thing that you can certainly explore. I made the recommendation of creating a 401k in which people can put $5,000, $10,000, and then have that funds invest in infrastructure in their own state.
Great idea.
Or across the United States. So there are mechanisms like that, and having some of the infrastructure assets digitized, as it were, and having a cryptocurrency there is something that we should definitely explore.
That's a really interesting thought, too, about the 401k. Okay, so maybe that's in the future, but the last part right now, for now, Sadek, as far as the hurricanes go, do you know, is there any way to assess kind of what we're going to need at this point, or do you kind of have an idea, maybe the cost of anything, or is it too early to know from the impact?
I think it's too early to determine the impact, but what I can tell you is the cost is not going to be simply increasing capital expenditure to rebuild the existing infrastructure that has been unfortunately destroyed because of the two hurricanes. It will have to be an increase in capital expenditure to upgrade the infrastructure, to make it more resilient to climate change, and since we're at it, to improve the technology, as you were saying earlier, to improve these assets with the technology available today to make it much more efficient. So this is the time to do it. Otherwise, all we're doing is postponing that kind of capital expenditure, which will end up costing more in the future. So now is the time to do it, and to do it efficiently and smartly.
All right. Sadek, great stuff. Great to have you on the show. Super interesting book, very accessible. It's like a history lesson. It's an idea book. So I highly recommend everybody check it out. Appreciate your time.
Thanks very much, Oliver.
Absolutely. Good to have you back. Sadek Wahba. The book is Build, Investing in America's Infrastructure. There's the big book that we saw, and then the Primer 2, which is a really nice way to get started.